Sarah Mitchell sat alone at the corner table of the Riverside Cafe, her fingers wrapped around a now cold cup of coffee. The winter afternoon light filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished wooden floor. She checked her phone again 45 minutes late. Her friends had warned her about blind dates at 53, but she had let her sister convince her anyway. "You deserve happiness, Sarah." Margaret had said it's been 3 years since David passed. Sarah smoothed down her beige dress, the one she'd bought specifically for today, and felt foolish around her. The cafe hummed with quiet conversation. An elderly couple shared a newspaper in comfortable silence. A woman tapped away on her laptop. The young waiter who had refilled her coffee twice already gave her a sympathetic smile from across the room. She should leave. That would be the dignified thing to do. But something kept her in that chair. Maybe it was the memory of how genuine he had sounded on the phone. Marcus Romano, a widower like herself. A father, someone who understood loss. Their mutual friend Linda had introduced them, insisting they would connect for 2 weeks. They had talked on the phone every evening. His voice was warm and thoughtful. He told her about his daughters, about rebuilding his life after his wife Elena died in childbirth, about learning to braid hair and attend tea parties. She had shared her own story of grief, of learning to live alone after 30 years of marriage. The conversations had felt like coming home. But now, staring at the empty chair across from her, Sarah wondered if she had imagined the connection. Maybe she had been so desperate for companionship that she had heard what she wanted to hear. The door chimed. Sarah didn't look up. She had looked up at every chime for the past 45 minutes. "Excuse me, miss." The voice was small and uncertain. Sarah glanced down and her breath caught. 2 identical little girls stood beside her table. They couldn't have been more than 5 years old. One wore a bright red sweater, the other a soft pink dress. Both had masses of golden curls and wide, anxious eyes. "Are you Miss Sarah?" the girl in red asked. "I am," Sarah said slowly, her heart beginning to race. The girl in pink clutched her sister's hand tightly. "My daddy's sorry, he's late." Behind them, a man appeared, slightly out of breath. He wore a gray vest over a white shirt, his dark hair slightly disheveled in his hands. He carried what looked like a fishbowl covered with a cloth. This had to be Marcus. "I am so incredibly sorry," he said, his accent carrying the soft melody of his Italian heritage. "Please, let me explain." Sarah looked at the 3 of them standing there, the exhausted father, the worried children. Something in her chest loosened. "Sit down," she said quietly. "All of you." The relief on Marcus's face was immediate. He helped both girls into chairs, then sat down himself, carefully placing the covered bowl on the table. The girls sat perfectly still, their eyes darting between their father and Sarah. "I was ready to leave on time," Marcus began, running a hand through his hair. "I promise you, I was looking forward to this all week." "What happened?" Sarah asked, and she was surprised to find she genuinely wanted to know. The girl in red, the bolder of the 2, spoke up. "Mr. Bubbles was sick." "Mr. Bubbles?" Sarah couldn't help but smile. "They're goldfish," Marcus explained. "When I went to check on the girls, before leaving, they were in tears. Mr. Bubbles was floating on his side." "We thought he was dead," the girl in pink whispered, her eyes filling with tears at the memory. Marcus leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I know how this sounds. I know you have every right to think I'm making excuses. But these 2 have already lost their mother. The thought of them losing their fish, something they've cared for every single day." He paused, shaking his head. "I couldn't leave them crying. I called every pet store within 20 miles. Finally found one with an emergency line. The owner talked me through changing the water, adjusting the temperature. It took forever." The girl in red added solemnly. "I tried to call you," Marcus continued, "but in the chaos, I couldn't find my phone. Later, I found it in the fish tank bag, completely soaked." Sarah sat back in her chair, processing this. Here was a man who had kept her waiting for nearly an hour for a goldfish. But as she looked at those 2 little faces, so worried about her reaction, so protective of their father, she understood this wasn't irresponsibility. This was a father who had chosen his daughters' hearts over making a good impression. "Is Mr. Bubbles okay now?" she asked gently. Both girls' faces lit up. Yes, they chorused. The girl in pink added shyly, Daddy said we could bring him to show you he's really alive. Marcus lifted the cloth from the bowl. Sure enough, a small orange goldfish swam in lazy circles. Apparently none the worse for wear we couldn't find a babysitter this late. Marcus admitted my neighbor had an emergency of her own, so I brought them along, hoping you might understand. He looked at Sarah with such hope and exhaustion that she felt something shift inside her. I have a confession, she said. Slowly, all three of them leaned in. When my son was 7, we were supposed to go to his school play. My husband and I. It was David's first speaking role. She smiled at the memory. I was a bank manager then. Very serious about punctuality and responsibility. That afternoon, I found an injured bird in the parking lot. My assistant said to leave it, that I would be late. Sarah looked at Marcus. I was 2 hours late to that play. Missed David's entire performance. But I couldn't leave that bird suffering. What happened to the bird? The girl in red asked. I took it to a wildlife rescue. They saved its wing. Released it 3 months later. Sarah reached across the table and gently touched the fishbowl. My son forgave me because he understood that sometimes being kind is more important than being on time. Marcus's eyes were bright. Thank you, he said softly, for understanding. The waiter approached, tactfully pretending not to notice the fishbowl. Can I get you folks anything? Marcus looked at his daughters. Are you girls hungry? They nodded eagerly. What followed was one of the most unconventional first dates Sarah had ever experienced. The girls, whose names she learned were Emma and Grace, gradually warmed to her. Emma, in red, was the bold one, asking questions and telling elaborate stories. Grace, in pink, was quieter, but her smiles were sweet and genuine. Marcus was attentive to all three of them, cutting sandwiches into smaller pieces, wiping mouths, answering endless questions, all while trying to maintain an adult conversation. Tell me honestly, Sarah said during a moment when the girls were distracted by coloring menus the waiter had provided. Is your life always this chaotic? Marcus laughed, a deep, genuine sound. Always, completely, wonderfully chaotic. I miss that, Sarah admitted the noise, the urgency of small emergencies. My son lives across the country now. My house is very quiet. Quiet sounds like a dream, Marcus said, but his eyes were on his daughters, full of love. Quiet is overrated, Sarah replied, as the afternoon wore into evening. Sarah found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. The girls showed her their drawings. Emma had drawn a picture of Mr. Bubbles as a superhero. Grace had drawn a picture of Sarah, with exaggerated kindness in her eyes. This is how you look, Grace explained. Nice. Sarah had to blink back tears. When it was finally time to leave, Marcus walked her to her car, a daughter holding each of his hands. I would very much like to see you again, he said, though I promise next time will be more conventional. Sarah looked at this man, this tired, devoted father. She thought about all the proper dates she could have had, the men who would have arrived on time with flowers and polished shoes. None of them had brought their hearts so openly. I have a better idea, she said. Next Saturday, come to my house for dinner, all three of you. We'll make it early, before bedtime. Emma and Grace jumped up and down. Can Mr. Bubbles come too? Emma asked. Mr. Bubbles can absolutely come too, Sarah confirmed. Marcus's smile was radiant that night. Sarah called her sister. So, how was the blind date? Margaret asked. Did he show up? He was 45 minutes late, Sarah said. Oh no, I'm so sorry. Don't be, Sarah interrupted. He brought his daughters and a goldfish and more love than I've seen in years. That sounds like a story. Margaret said. It is, Sarah agreed, and I think it might just be the beginning of a beautiful one. 3 months later, Sarah's quiet house was no longer quiet. Emma and Grace came over every Sunday. They had tea parties and baking sessions. Mr. Bubbles lived in a larger tank in her living room, swimming in circles while the girls did homework at her kitchen table. Marcus would arrive after work, sometimes with flowers, sometimes with groceries. Always with that same grateful smile. They took things slowly. Both had learned that love the second time around required patience. But there was no doubt where they were heading on a spring evening as they watched the girls play in Sarah's backyard. Marcus took her hand. I was so afraid you would leave that day, he said. When I was late, I almost did, Sarah admitted. But then 2 little girls reminded me what really matters. What's that? That the best things in life are worth waiting for, even if they arrive late. Carrying a fishbowl, Marcus laughed and pulled her close in the yard. Emma was teaching Grace a new game. Mr. Bubbles swam peacefully in his tank, and Sarah, who had thought her story was over, realized it was simply turning a new page, one filled with noise and chaos and the beautiful unpredictability of love. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder that second chances exist at every age. Subscribe for more stories about love, hope, and the beautiful, unexpected moments that change our lives. Leave a comment below, telling us about a time when being late led to something wonderful. Your story might inspire someone today.